Yeah. Hello, everybody. My name's Anthony Cerulli. I'm the director of the Center for South Asia at UW-Madison, and I'm a professor in the Department of Asian Languages and Cultures here, specializing in the history of science, technology, and medicine in South Asia. And I'm joined this afternoon by my colleague from the history department here at UW-Madison and the chair of the last conference we had just in October, Viren Murthy, who you see on the screen with me. And we'll be talking today about abstracts and abstracts in particular for the annual conference on South Asia here at Madison. We're giving you a little bit of insight as to what goes on when you submit an abstract to this conference. Viren will talk in particular a little bit about the genre of the abstract, and we also want to take questions. So the idea behind this workshop really was to say a little bit up front, but then to field questions. So if you have questions at any time, please put them in the chat or in the Q&A section at the bottom of the screen. As you're looking, it's at the bottom of the screen right next to chat. And there are a couple people here at Madison on this webinar who will collect those and make sure that we get them. They'll also be posting things as we go along in the chat. As you see, Andrea just posted a welcome to everybody. And so keep your eyes on that. She'll be putting links to things as they arise and so on and so forth. And we'll get to your questions after we both speak a little bit. So the aims really of this, as I said, is to give you some insight as to what goes on when you submit an abstract to present a paper or a symposium here at the annual conference on South Asia. Now, they're more or less the same kind of thing. Submitting a symposium always happens, and a panel or a paper happen basically the same way. But if you're submitting for a symposium, you have to supply some additional information apart from the abstract, such as who will be involved in that symposium, whether you think it should be a half a day or a full day, and you provide some rationale as to why you think it should be for a half a day or a full day, and you give some information about the people who will be participating. So I'm not going to say too much about that right now. We're going to get straight into the panel and paper abstract presentation. Instead, you're welcome to ask questions about the symposia as well if you'd like, and we can just field those as they arise later in the question and answer part of this discussion. So generally speaking, you can anticipate seeing a call for papers for the annual conference sometime in January, mid to late January. And then the portal on our website, the conference website, opens up on February 1st of every year. And that's when you can start submitting a panel proposal and then a paper within that panel. We also accept, by the way, individual papers that are not connected to panels. And I'll say a little bit more about that in just a moment. You submit these and they're submitted anonymously, or rather you're connected to it, of course, but by the time they all get fielded and collected together, there's a conference committee here at UW-Madison that collects them all anonymously, so we don't see who is submitting which papers or which panels and so on and so forth. And that conference committee is made up of UW-Madison faculty. About half of the people on that committee are UW-Madison faculty. And of course, the chair of the conference, so Viren was the chair of the conference committee effectively last year when he chaired the conference. And then there are external faculty members also, specialists in South Asian studies in some field within South Asian studies, who participate on the conference committee and review abstracts with the folks here at UW-Madison. Everybody reads a collection of these abstracts that are submitted. 3 people read each one, and then at the end of a period when that's set up by Andrea, gives everybody on the committee a date when they need to have their reviews done. The committee comes together in person or in Zoom like this, and they talk about how they ranked or how they reviewed the various abstracts and panel proposals that were submitted. If it's a unanimous yes across the 3 different readers, it's accepted. And we need to come together as a committee, especially when there maybe is some disagreement, and we can talk about how these reviews, come across with one another. And then maybe people who didn't read the abstract who are on the committee can also weigh in by taking a look at the abstract at that time too. I guess, let me see if I was going to say what I think that's really more or less what happens. Then we collect them all, and then we send out decisions to those of you who've submitted an abstract, and you get the answer, and then we go forward from there, planning your visit to Madison for the conference. That's more or less just the logistics and the nuts and bolts behind what happens when you submit an abstract. Of course, there's a word limit, and there's I think some techniques that can be perhaps useful to you when you're creating your abstract that Viren's going to talk about a little bit now. I'll just add that when we take your questions, or when Viren starts speaking about this, we're speaking from our own experience of submitting abstracts to conferences over the years. There's certainly lots of ways that you can imagine the abstract, and we're just offering our advice about what an abstract can do for you when you're hoping to participate in a conference. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Viren.
Great. Thank you. And thank you all for coming. So we put down some ideas. We were talking about this yesterday, and so I'm just going to share my screen and begin sharing what I have as a PowerPoint. I think everyone can see that. Okay, good. So as Anthony was saying, there's a lot of contingency in a lot of this, that what we're doing is sort of giving you some general ideas about abstract writing and the genre of abstract writing for conferences in particular. So there are two basic parts to what I'm going to talk about. One is sort of the temporality of abstract writing for conferences, as opposed to, other genres, because you can write abstracts for other things as well. And we're basically talking about this specific conference, but also more generally for conferences. And then elements of a potentially attractive abstract. Now, and I say potentially just because, as Anthony said, there are many different ways of writing abstracts, and we're just drawing on our own experience. So there is a kind of a speculative temporality, I would say, to the abstract writing. And that is because abstract writing for conferences is specifically difficult because it embodies a temporality of the not yet. One has often not yet written the paper or the presentation, and yet one has to write an abstract for it, right? So I think that makes it a little bit difficult. Now, obviously, there are cases where there are different versions of this not yet, right? Because if one has completed a dissertation and one's writing an abstract, it's still you haven't written the paper, but you have other things and so on. But in many cases, the actual presentation hasn't been written, right? So I think that's the thing. So one is often writing a paper that one will have written, right, by the time of the conference, right? Moreover, if you're writing a panel abstract, then you are discussing how numerous only potentially existing papers together, right, would contribute to a future conference. This temporal dimension distinguishes the abstract from numerous other types of writing, which bear some similarities to the conference abstract, such as the introduction to a paper. But the introduction to a paper, as you know, is usually written at the end often, even though you might write one in the beginning, but then you'll correct it later on. So what is the goal of the conference abstract? The ultimate goal of the abstract in the context of a conference is to gain the recognition of the conference committee members, right? And this comes in the form of an acceptance letter. As Anthony has said, we send those out after the committee meets. Now, once you've been accepted, as we all know, the abstract can be sublated into a paper that diverges somewhat from the original abstract, right? So there could be a divergence. You write one thing, but then you then develop the paper in ways that are obviously, not going to be somewhat different from the abstract. But the abstract does commit you to a general topic. So that one should be careful about how you frame your topic. If you can allow for openness, then you can more easily and perhaps with less embarrassment change the topic in the future or alter it. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. So now I guess the most relevant and maybe useful and also somewhat controversial ideas. What makes a potentially attractive abstract? So one of the first things we look at is going to be the title. So if you can come up with the title that the committee will remember, it might help your abstract. Now take the following title from our plenary, right? To Love the Leader, Sri Lankan Tamils and Military Sublimes. And the other one, Maulana Bashani and the Making of Bangladesh. So these are two titles that in some way combine what I would say something like something particular with something more general or universal or broad, right? So in one case, the leader, right? In both of these cases, you move from the particular to the more general, from affection for a leader, right, to Sri Lankan Tamils, and then to military sublimes. So what this does is it gets more people involved in the topic, right? If you think about the leader, and one knows the leader of Sri Lankan, well, people interested in that are going to be interested. Oh, yeah, that's interesting. But then Sri Lankan Tamils, well, that goes even broader. Military sublimes, now you can get people all over interesting. Similarly, you go from this particular figure, Bashani, to then the making of Bangladesh, which is a lot. So like the abstract, the title should make the committee or the audience care about your topic. So now the body of the abstract. So obviously you have to make sure you follow the rules, word count. And these structural limitations are important because there's something specific to the genre, right? If you talk about an introduction, you can expand that. There are different ways. There's no limit on that length. Well, there's some vague limit. But in this, the limit is much more fixed, and that doesn't give you a lot of space to develop, your topic, and yet in that space, you've got to do what you can to make what you're saying interesting to a wide audience. So for the rest, I'm going to follow the same guidelines for writing a short introduction. The easiest thing to correct would be clarity at the sentence level, and then the coherence of the abstract, what we might call the flow of information, the title and the various papers in the abstract, right, should overlap in theme. Now here there's a book by Joseph Williams called Writing Towards Grace and Clarity, which I I think can be useful. Again, you can use that as a reference. You may not agree, but at least he gives some ideas of how to write a clear sentence and then also at the paragraph level. So like introductions, abstracts should state their contribution, something that others in the field maybe have overlooked. So take from the plenary, right? I suggest moving away from dominant models and explanations of kingship and charisma towards a more dynamic assessment of the novel economies of love between leaders and followers across South Asia. So here, notice that what the author has done has broadened the scope. And so that's why it's not just people who are interested in my area, but much broader. Moreover, when we see dominant models, we get a sense of where the author's contribution is, right? Dominant models, this is what most people are doing, but I'm doing something different. So this means that I'm going to contribute to the conference. And as conference organizers, we're also looking for, well, is this something that a lot of people are going to go to? And usually, if there is a broader interest, that's something that might be attractive. So now I'm going to take an example from another conference, right? And this is a conference. I'm not going to mention the author, but this is a paper or rather an abstract that actually both of the examples I'm going to give are ones that were selected. But that doesn't mean so. So this is where the contingency is. It's that it doesn't. It's not the case that if you didn't get accepted or something, it means your abstract wasn't good. That's not necessarily the case. And not so good abstracts can also get selected. So there are a lot of contingent factors here. But let's look at this and see what we can make of it, right? So this paper engages with the question of unevenness in modern India through a rethinking of global capitalism, including what is global and what is capitalism, and what has come to be known as the third world, including what is local, what is pre-capital, and what is non-capital, deploying on the one hand a class analytic, surplus labor focused framework, and a post-capitalocentric imagination, and on the other, a post-Lacanian perspective. The paper revisits the relationship between global capitalism and third world in terms of a conceptual triad: hegemony, foreground, foreclosure. The paper, in the process, inaugurates a counter concept of the world of the third, where the world of the third is that which is foreclosed, and the third world is that which is foregrounded in the context of global capitalist hegemony. Capitalism is thus seen as a hegemonic formation. Now, this is a coherent abstract. Now, but the thing that I would suggest that could be tricky is if you're applying for a larger conference. This was a smaller conference with a specific theme, but a larger conference, there could be, you want to make sure that you do not have terms that some of the committee members are not going to maybe follow, right? So that, the post-Lacanian, all of that, the significance of all of that may not be immediately evident. So you want to try to make it more accessible. The other thing is, in the very beginning, it would be good, I think, to rather than just engages, well, what's new here, right? What is the contribution? And I think that's something that you really have to think about, right? And so that's something that we'll see in the other abstract. Now, this is a continuation of the same. This was a longer abstract because the word limit was different. So you'll see here, the author then continues to describe what the world of the third is and so on. But I think that one of the things that the abstract could perhaps do better is really make the necessity of this concept. Why is the world of the third so important? Why do we need this concept and so on? Maybe a little more explicit, right? So rather than say, I'm going to bring all these theories together, what do you get that's new after bringing these theories together? Okay. So now with this, I'm going to move on to another abstract from the same conference that is going to be different, right? So, and this again, I've excerpted from, this was a larger abstract, but take a look at this abstract. The presence and indeed persistence of petty commodity production as one of the most important characteristics of the contemporary Indian economy is the central concern of an important recent work in critical political economy, rethinking capitalist development, primitive accumulation, governmentality, and post-colonial capitalism by Kalyan Sanyal. This critically acclaimed work has received strong endorsement from noted political theorist Partha Chatterjee, who has used Sanyal's framework as the political economy foundation of his own theorization of democracy and economic transformation in contemporary India via the concept of political society. In this paper, I will critically engage with Sanyal's work from the following angles. First, I will draw on earlier literature on petty commodity production and the informal sector to evaluate the usefulness of the central notion of non-capital. Second, I will look at empirical evidence regarding the evolution of what Sanyal calls non-capital in some countries that have witnessed the development of capitalism. This will include the USA in the late 19th century, European countries and Japan in the immediate post-war, South Korea in the 1980s, and China and India since the 1990s. So the abstract goes on, but here you get a very clear sense of the significance. What he's doing with the significance by connecting it to Partha Chatterjee, a lot of people might know, suddenly you'll say, okay, now I see the significance of this book, right? And also, of course, there's also the idea that, oh, it's one of the most important characteristics and so on, right? And then he says, well, but I'm going to be critical of his framework, right? And I'm going to do it from these angles. So it's very clear that what the contribution is and so on, right? And then he's saying, well, it's not just going to be interesting to people who work on South Asia, but even broader, right? I mean, it's USA, China, it's bringing it all. So now that the significance, how you talk about the significance doesn't always mean you have to expand regionally. You can focus on something specific, but what you have to say is what I would suggest in the abstract is always try to make that significance go beyond just the people already interested in the materials, right? So I think that's all I have. So I'll stop there, and I look forward to answering your questions. We look forward to answering your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Viren. That was terrific. Okay. Oh, there we go. The one thing Viren and I talked about these things, so I'm happy to address some of these things too in the Q&A and other things. Something that came to my mind while he was speaking that is important just to flag is that the conference committee is made up of people coming from all different disciplines within South Asian studies. So the idea of speaking a language that is, or not using too much jargon, speaking and writing in a way that can, be picked up and engaged by people outside of your discipline is an important thing to keep in mind, because it's very likely that somebody, if you're in sociology, it's not always going to be sociologists who are going to be reviewing the abstracts. And I think that that's often the case at interdisciplinary conferences, in my experience too, like the South Asia conference here at Madison. And so I noticed Andrea said you're welcome to post questions at any time. I don't see any in the chat, and I'll check the Q&A. I don't see any there either. So we're happy to answer questions, or Viren, if you.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm not sure if this is, can they just speak, or no, that's not allowed.
I think that that's possible. Somebody can help them unmute. We just need to know who it is. So if you could raise your hand, or if you can put in the chat, please unmute me.
Yeah, if you could just raise your hand, that might be, if you find writing in the chat a bit cumbersome, you can just ask questions directly.
I see something just popped up. You answer
Someone.
all possible questions with your presentation.
I don't know about that. I mean, I think that it's a long, as you said, there's a lot of different factors that go into these things. So, but I think the one thing about jargon, I think, is could probably apply across the board in terms of various conferences, except maybe the ones that have a very specific theme where people all know. I mean, that specific conference was a conference on Marxism. So then you could maybe expect them to know some of the literature and so on.
Yeah, the 200 to 300 word limit's pretty short, and so even putting in parentheses references to certain books or thinkers may not be needed in an abstract of that length.
Right.
You might just get straight to it. It looks like the chat is disabled. Raised hand, that doesn't work. I'm seeing
there are some questions that I can that I see that you guys can answer to. Do you see it in the chat? There are 2 questions.
Okay, let me see.
In the Q&A, I think I see. Somebody said that the chat's disabled, but I see in abstract, can we include any kind of secondary data to give an overall picture related to the topic? I'm not sure what is meant by secondary data in particular here.
Yeah, so that's why it might be better if we could get the raised
Let them
hand
speak.
function, so we could have a little bit of back and forth.
So, Shahana, do you know what happens if I press the answer live button? Sorry, folks, that
Where
I don't know, but I think Andrea is taking a look at the chat settings. But you can try and see that answer live.
Yeah,
so
I mean, so yeah, that'd be nice. Answer live. I think one thing. So let's see. There's there's another question here. But I guess first let's not leave the secondary data. I guess yeah, the key is what we mean by secondary data. I mean, usually the abstracts that I've seen have usually all been prose. So there's not like suddenly some numbers or something like that. So that if that's the kind of data we're talking about, but you can include the data in the abstract through prose, saying, well, this is what we found, or something like that, I think would be my suggestion.
I think Anne's
Um,
hand is raised so they can sort of.
oh, great. So someone's hands is raised. So let's
I'm on mute.
yes.
great.
At the bottom of the chat,
Nice.
it says chat disabled.
Oh, okay. Now it should be good, but you can speak, just
Didn't
speak
work either.
directly.
Okay, we're all functioning on all cylinders now. Okay,
I think so.
Yes.
that's all I had to say.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay.
Right.
That's good.
Thank you for letting us know that
Yeah,
wasn't
it's good. It's good that we're working now. So, okay, let's see another one. What should the proportion of the abstract in context of the intro, main theme, and result? What should they be the proportion? So that I guess I don't think there's a fixed proportion that I can think of. If you want to take that, I mean, I think that I think I would say that you want to get to the point as quickly as possible, because and this is something I didn't get to because I was talking about the abstract as if it's an individual paper abstract, but really in these, as I said, there's panel abstracts. So if you think, and in the panel abstract, the you have such a short time or space, because you've got to talk about the panel as a whole, and then you've got to describe each of the panelists' papers. So in that case, especially, you have much less time to talk about, or space to talk about, really your contribution. So I think context should be, it's obviously needs to be there, but the quicker you can do it, if you can do it in a sentence or something like that, that would be ideal, I would think, and then come with your, as you saw in the abstract on Kalyan Sanyal, the first line is that, okay, there's this book, it's done this, and now I'm going to tell you, then maybe significance, and then go into the criticisms or the main point of the paper. Similarly with the panel abstract.
And personally speaking, having written abstracts for a while over the years now, and reading abstracts at the conference here in Madison too that are submitted, you see all sorts of different approaches to this. So some will be like the example that Beren showed, which say, I engage, just starts off with, I do this, and begin right into it. Others take a more kind of narrative approach and try to set up the context of the paper by maybe giving an engaging anecdote from the field, if it's based on field work, or taking a scholar that is often well known within a field, someone like Partha Chatterjee. It's a name that a lot of people know across disciplines and might be familiar with the work. So that can be a kind of way for the reviewers to sort of be captivated, perhaps, and then get to the end where you drop the information of what you're going to be doing. In this paper is the last sentence. I will actually talk about Chatterjee and so on. So it's really a matter of style at that point. What they can both be equally effective in the end. It's just a matter of your comfort level with how you want to present it, I think. And so there's not a good answer to say what the proportion ought to be. But if it's 250 words, there's not a lot of time for anything, to be honest. And so you want to get the point across while also allowing yourself to have a little bit of freedom to write the paper. And keep that title, keep the theme, because that's what people will see when they're reading the program guide at the conference, and they're going to come see your paper expecting to hear about this. So you don't want to change it too much from what you propose. That's okay. I see many more questions. Let's see.
Yeah, now I see some.
Is writing an abstract without citing theorists or field-related writers okay? I personally, I think it is, actually. There's not a lot of time to cite too many people, unless your paper is actually taking up a particular book or scholar and responding or rejecting or supporting or something like that. I think you can save all of those references for the paper itself. So if it can be left out, like what we saw as the parenthetical references in those examples in the PowerPoint slide. So I don't think it's necessary. Viren, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's necessary, but I do think that maybe some sense of so you don't have to mention names in the abstract or anything like that, but some sense of, well, people have done this, but I'm going to be doing this. I mean, that something like that sometimes helps, I think. As you might see that people won't mention names, but they'll say, recently there's been a lot of discussion on this, but they've overlooked this, just like you would do like in an introduction to a paper or something like that, right? I think, I mean, in many ways, the abstract to me is very similar to an introduction. And even though we now in a lot of papers and journals we have to write abstracts after we write the introduction, but I think it's a shorter version. It should give a sense of, yeah, well, this is what makes it really important. Because it's not just a description of what you're going to do. It's a description of what you're going to do plus what makes it important, what makes it significant somehow, right? I think.
Yeah, and maybe if maybe the panel proposal, right, will actually have a little bit more information and that you don't need in the paper proposal itself. Yeah, so that's something that you would work out with whoever the convener of the panel is, I suppose, too, and that if you feel like you need it, maybe it can go in the panel proposal. The next question is about the panel proposals. Should they have a mix of academics at various career stages and from diverse institutions? How are panels selected? So when panel submissions come to the conference committee, we definitely like to see a diversity of people at different stages in their career. That's especially true for the symposia in particular. These symposia are the day before the conference actually starts, those of you who aren't familiar with that, and they can either be a half day or a full day. And so there are many participants in these symposia. And I think it says it on the conference website that we encourage people to try to engage grad students, junior people at the early stages of their career, mid stages, and later stages to have a richer conversation. They're not always represented like that, and same goes with panels. That kind of diversity of experience in the field is I think a good thing. It produces often a very interesting and textured conversation. It doesn't have to be that way or from different institutions, but it's often a good thing. There are sometimes you'll see, I think, some panels where it's folks coming from one school. Is that trying to think? I wasn't on the conference committee this past year, so I actually didn't review any. But I don't know if that's a common thing that we see, actually. Viren, do we?
Yeah, I mean, you mean all people from one university? Yeah. I mean, I think generally in conferences we don't that's not encouraged by the committee. They like to see like networking, I think.
Yeah.
But that said, I mean that creates certain structural problems, and all of us who have organized committees or panels know this. I mean, you get the people, and then you've got to create a panel out of the people, right? So And then that becomes a bit of an issue because each one of them, they may not fit into a theme and so on. So you have to sort of work that out, the diversity of the types of panelists and the theme and the actual ideas that you want to get together. So
I think one thing that maybe is kind of a common structure for getting that people at different stages is that if it's people in graduate school or maybe early career on the panel, maybe a discussant would be invited, and that discussant would be somebody maybe further along in their career. That's a kind of structure I think we see quite a lot, not just at our conference, but I see it at conferences and to
no,
attend.
I think that's right. I think that's right. Yeah.
Is it advisable to mention more about the scholars you are drawing ideas from or building upon, or should it focus entirely on your own contribution to the field? Viren, you want to take this one?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit like the earlier question. That I think, there's no hard and fast rule for these things. I would say if I were to weigh the two, I would say your own contribution is more important than the scholars you mentioned. Because just mentioning the scholars, remember, this is not about name dropping. Okay, all these people, that's fine, that's great. And you've read these, that's impressive and everything. But remember that as a conference committee, we're going to be trying to think about, well, whether this panel or this paper is going to help, enrich our conference experience. And so that should be the key. So keep that as the goal. And then the rest of the stuff is all whether it helps make that goal, right? So you can mention scholars if you think it's going to help. So that again, if you look at the two examples, the second example, it was very clear. There were two names mentioned, but both names were intimately connected to the goal or the contribution of the particular author, right? Somehow he was arguing against this person. The other Partha Chatterjee was there to explain the significance, right? So in other cases, sometimes you just have, well, I'm going to draw on this and I'm going to draw on this and this, but really the key should really be the focus. So I wouldn't think about this as mutually exclusive, right? It's not that either or, it's that you should focus on the contribution to your field, and in doing that, you can mention scholars and ideas and draw things like that.
Yeah, and that looks like the next question is similar to that about how much context, introductory context. I think we really, the abstract is more, in my view at least, it's the opportunity for you to get your contribution to the field or whatever discussion it is that you're contributing to across. And then when I go attend your paper, then I hear the kind of context scholarship that you've been engaging with there. And I think that somebody who picks up the conference program, reads the abstract, is expecting that. They want to see what you're going to say. They'll go listen to hear what you have to say and then see how you've engaged with people that maybe they were thinking about when they read your abstract, or maybe learning something new about different pieces of scholarship and scholars that you're engaging with. So the abstract, in my view, really, it's important to forefront your own contributions. You got one?
No, I'm just looking. I think I'm looking at the same thing. So it's I often get confused. Is that the next one?
I think I just addressed that. That was related to the context.
Oh, okay.
Those two are very similar.
Okay, so how to arrange the structure of the abstract? Should we write it with all the arguments? Okay, so I think the key is, as we said, there's only 200 to 300 words. So definitely all the arguments are not going to work, are not going to fit. So I would say think about the main argument. And remember, as I said, this is something you haven't yet written. So something you think you would argue, right? It could also be that. And then you want to make that as coherent and attractive as possible. What's the significance and so on. So I think that's the key would be to make that, to focus on one argument. And this, I'll go out on a limb here. I would suggest that a paper as well should have one main argument, and the other arguments are sort of sub-arguments. So I think that, yeah, so I mean that, I don't know if Anthony, you want to add something to that.
That's a good point. These papers, generally speaking, if in a traditional model of the panel, you're going to have about 20 minutes, right? So you're if you're presenting more than one main argument, right, maybe with some sub points that you're going to make along the way, you'll probably run out of time and not get to it all, and you'll find yourself in one of those situations where the panel organizers showing you you're out of time sign, and then you have to rush to the end and you end up skipping things. So that's a good advice, I think, to think about what's the overall point. And then that's basically the abstract. It's 250 words. Getting that all out is, it's a challenge, to be honest. Writing an abstract's not an easy thing to do. And even after many years of myself of writing them, still working on it, right? It's still not something that comes very naturally. Writing with an economy of words and ideas is maybe a lifelong endeavor. I don't know. For me, probably it will be.
Yeah, I definitely would say that. And I think for that reason, another thing I didn't put on the PowerPoint is I would suggest really start early. In the whole thing, I mean, you can't start too early. At least give yourself 3 or 4 months. Because what you'll notice when you're writing these abstracts, and that's been my experience as well, is that when the first time you write it, you're way more wordy than you need to be. Just because thinking happens also in language, and so you put down all these things as you're thinking about them, and then you have to go back and say, well, yeah, but this could be taken out. This is what I really want to say. And so, and also it helps to, if you're doing a panel, you read each other's abstracts, you sort of, you need to give time for all of that. So, so a few months, definitely I would start in advance, sometimes even earlier if you're finding panelists. And so, yeah, so that's, yeah.
We don't always work so far in advance. A few months sounds really ambitious to me, to be honest. But it's true. The more you revise, the more likely you're going to fit within the word count, and remove extraneous adjectives and adverbs and things that don't really need to be there to get your point across, because that's the goal.
Actually have a question.
Yeah.
Sorry, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Okay. So usually, like bigger conferences, like the annual conferences is generally otherwise also, there are always topics to the conference, right? Like things that are broadly things that the panelists are, or like people who are looking for abstracts from a particular topic. And I've wondered and sort of always felt how do you navigate the broadness of the topic? Like how do you determine the fitness of a topic of your own research project? You see what I mean? Like how closely do I need to relate to the topic of the conference? Is that something that you guys can address?
Well, it's a good question, actually, for particularly for the South Asia, the annual conference on South Asia. There's a theme every year, and sometimes panel proposals will come in particularly showing their adherence to the theme. So I'll let you, Viren, talk about your theme here in just a second. I was the conference chair in 2019, and the theme was artistry. And I had in my mind a whole bunch of different ways that could be engaged by people. And indeed it was addressed as panels on poetry, photography panels. They were all different, the artistry of the politics of artistry, or the artistry of politics, different ways. And I think that the themes, at least for our conference here in Madison, often are hopeful about getting a really rich array of ways to engage the theme. But you don't have to propose anything on the theme. It's just something that the plenaries and the keynote are going to address directly. And then oftentimes you'll see people proposing for that. So our conference is unique like that. Not every annual conference or every major conference will have a theme like that. If Shahani, your question was about if you're a panel organizer and you're fielding, you send out a call looking for people to submit, and how do you determine who would be a good fit when you get, say, 10 proposals and you have room for 4 or 3, something like that. That maybe is a different question. But I took that as the annual conference here in Madison. Ren, do you want to say something about the themes? Because you've done this twice. You've chaired twice.
Yeah, and I think, both times I had a theme. Yeah, I guess they always have a theme. So I think my quick answer to that would be, it might help, but I don't think it's necessary. That because as the conference chair who sees is come up with the theme, you say, oh, I immediately when I see an abstract and I look at the theme, I say, oh yeah, well this person he's following this, or he or she is following the theme, right? So but I don't think that helped greatly in getting the panel accepted. So I think it might be, if my advice to a panelist or a panel organizer would be to think about the theme and think, well, if there's some way we can tweak it such that it can mention the theme, let's do it. If it's way off, then it's not worth sacrificing the coherence of the panel to just make a gesture toward the theme, because remember, there are 8 or 9 people looking at this abstract, and they're going to be able to spot incoherences fairly quickly. So that'll be relevant. But if you are able to sort of work it in somehow, and often the themes are pretty broad. Like I think the first theme I think I had was resistance. And so that, I mean, everyone was getting into it. I mean, people were, oh yeah, I'm resisting this, I'm resisting that, right? There's resisting, right? The second one was a little more difficult, structure and spontaneity. So there we could see we had less. But yeah, so the quick answer would be there's no necessary. It's not necessary, but it could help if it's possible.
Okay, so the idea is not to force fit a topic or a theme into your topic. Got it.
Exactly.
Somebody asked, and I quickly answered in the Q&A, if the theme for next year's conference has been set yet, and it has not yet. Well, that'll come out with the call, I believe. When the call happens in January, call for papers, and then the submission portal opens up on February 1st, you'll know the conference theme at that point. And if that's something that you happen to be working on, around that, whatever the theme is going to be, then you might want to propose something about it, but it's definitely not something you have to propose.
Anthony, can I jump in really quick?
Yeah, please. And let me just say, the people who have been speaking, those of you who are attending, the last voice was Shahana, who works in the Center for South Asia, and now this voice is Andrea, and they both are instrumental in running the conference. And so just so you know, everybody.
Folks, if you haven't had the opportunity to meet me, I'm Andrea Fowler. I'm the Assistant Director here at the Center for South Asia and the Conference Coordinator, as Anthony mentioned. And just to underline what Anthony was saying about the call for papers that will go out in January, in that email, you'll see conference dates, theme, additional advice about, which countries are included in the region of South Asia, any other advice that we can share with you about conference submission guidelines. Also included this year will be some walkthrough videos that our conference assistant Risham will be putting together about how to navigate the submission portal for those of you who might be submitting for the first time and have never registered for our conference before. If you're new to the annual conference on South Asia, welcome. Risham's going to put together some how-to videos for you as well. So there'll be a lot of information in that call for papers. And as soon as I finish talking, I'll put together the link in the chat to help you get signed up on our email list if you are not already a part of that. So thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you, Andrea. And thanks for all these questions so far. I see a few more still in there. And
there's one. Is this how might the scope of the abstract align with or differ from related studies? Is that the next one?
I think it is, yeah.
So it'd be nice if I could know a little more about what related studies is. Maybe this person could join with the raise hand function.
In the meantime, it looks like we've got a question about visas here, and I'm not sure that I'm the. Will there be a virtual component in 2024 as well? And I think I'll answer this as generally as I can, and maybe even defer to Andrea in the end. Looks like this past conference we had a designated space for virtual participation, and it went pretty well. Is my assessment of how that went, and I believe we'll be keeping a designated space. I don't know what the percentage was that we had. You need to, when you propose, you also have to, I think, tick a box whether you're planning to participate virtually. We certainly want to be able to offer as much virtual participation as we can so that people who can't show up in Madison can still take part in the conference. Andrea, are you able to address this a little bit with more detail than me?
Yeah, I certainly can. So when you first start the process, you need to register before you can submit a proposal. And when you start the registration process, one of the first questions it will ask you is, where are you located, in the United States or international? And that will help determine what your registration path is. And then the second question it will ask you is, do you plan to participate in person or virtually? And that will help determine what your registration fee will be. At this point, I cannot say for certain, but I believe that we will continue to offer reduced virtual registration for internationally based participants, as we did in 2023. As far as the actual conference itself, in 2023, we had 3 rooms that were fully designated for virtual or hybrid panels that had two-way communication. That went very well. Additional rooms did have some Zoom participants. That equipment is kind of build your own Zoom link type of thing. We're working with the hotel that hosts our conference every year to figure out what else we can do to kind of bump up and support that technology just a little bit better to help smooth out any glitches in the system. I don't know yet what all of that might look like. Please keep in mind that that technology costs us extra money that we're trying really hard not to pass on to our participants, especially those who are already burdened by high travel costs coming from outside the United States. So we're working within that system as best we can to not make this participating in this conference more costly for you all. So yes, there will be a virtual component. We don't know the full scope yet of what it'll look like, and more information will hopefully be included in that call for proposals that goes out in January.
Thanks, Andrea. Hopefully that answered the question there. That's the last one I see. I think
one more
visa,
comment on visas, if I
What's
can.
that?
As far as the visa slots, to Namrata's concern there about visas, if you are, even just hopeful that you will submit a proposal, go ahead and try to get an appointment. You can always, cancel it. Hopefully you'll need that appointment and you'll be able to try to come to the conference anyway. But please apply for that appointment well in advance. If you need a letter of support for your visa application, there is a form on our website that you can fill out, and we will send you a letter of invitation to the conference to help support your application process. So if there's very specific information you need to have included on that, let us know and we'll work with you to get that drafted appropriately. We cannot expedite your visa process in any way. All we can do is send you the letter. But I strongly encourage anybody that if this applies to you, try to make that appointment as soon as you can in the hopes that you'll need it.
There is another question about this conversation we're having. Where will the recording be? Where can you find it? Where can you access it? It will be on the conference website at some point, right? Andrea, is that?
Yes. Yeah. As soon as we make any edits that we need to kind of soften the beginning and the opening, we'll probably put it on the presenter guidelines page. And I'll send out an email to the full conference email list as soon as that's posted for everybody.
Any further questions? I see some people still in attendance. If you
Yeah.
have any
Oh,
questions.
let me see here. Someone not really. Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't see something. I don't see another question.
Last call for questions. This will be posted, as we were just saying. So if you want to come back and take a listen or look at those great slides that Varen showed, those will be available. And of course, we can answer questions too. If something comes up in your mind after we close this out, you can send us an email. Andrea, Varen, or I will be happy to help. So I think unless somebody sneaks in a question here in the next minute or two, we're going to close it up. And I just want to thank you all for attending. Thank you, Varen, for giving us the PowerPoint presentation. And
thank you.
About the abstracts.
Yeah, thank you all. Thank you all for coming. Yes.
And hope to see you in Madison or virtually if you're participating virtually. And let us know if you have any questions. Thanks, Andrea and Shahana, also for your help in this webinar and answering the questions that we weren't able to answer. So everybody have a good rest of your day wherever you are. And
yes.